Hi everyone, you are Reddit expose there, enjoy watching.
Washington, rainy October. The leaves, like copper tears, fall on the sidewalks, and every rustle reminds me of her, of Emily. We met here, in the city of ambition and cold politeness. She is an artist, I am a young political analyst. Her eyes, the color of the autumn sky, saw what I had missed, drowned in numbers and forecasts. She taught me how to feel and live now. We loved fast and bright, like an election race, and sure, like a summer vacation. One day she disappeared, leaving a note. I need to find myself. Where is it without me? I spent 2 years learning to move on, but I didn't forget. I passed by our coffee bar and looked for her gaze. Every gallery was a reminder of her talent. I recently found out that she returned and opened a studio in Georgetown. I'm here. I stood at the door in the rain like a wet puppy, reaching for the bell, and was petrified of hearing that I was no longer needed. I knocked anyway. The door opened. In front of me is Emily, no longer the same girl with a mischievous spark, but a woman with fatigue and hidden sadness in her eyes. She called me inside. The warm light, the smell of paints and herbal tea, her work on the walls, darker than the previous ones, but still alive. We were silent. Then I asked why she left. She lowered her head, and a tear rolled down her cheek. I was looking for myself, David, and I've lost something more important. What? You. The world has collapsed into one point. I've been living with the question why for so long, and suddenly I realized that the pain was mutual. I hugged her, afraid of losing her again. We stood there, just holding on to each other, until our chest got quieter. I whispered, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. And for the first time, it wasn't a promise, but a decision. I wiped her tears and asked her to tell me everything. She talked about fear, emptiness, and every day she remembered us. The words were like sharp shards, but I listened. We both needed it. When she stopped talking, I hugged her tighter. I understand. A new bond has emerged between us, not the old impulse, but something deeper, love that has passed through time and loss. I lifted her chin and looked into her eyes, and there, through the moist haze, a timid hope appeared. We'll manage, I said, together, slowly, for real. I kissed her on the forehead, and there was everything in that touch: regret for the past, faith in the future, and pure, calm love. We talked for a long time without words, with glances and palms. Her timid smile broke through the clouds. I held her like a fragile harmony, and I understood. This is not a dream. This is a new reality born from the ashes of the old one. For me, love has ceased to be just a feeling. It has become a choice, a responsibility. I want to be her house, and a house is not a wall, it's a heart. The fears gradually dissolved. I could feel her breathing steadying, our pulses finding a common rhythm. I also accepted my share of the blame, where I remained silent, where I was afraid of change. And he said out loud what he had been afraid of before. I underestimated you and us. It won't be like this anymore. We agreed to take small steps, without grand gestures and escaping from difficult topics. Coffee in our old place, but without trying to get everything back the way it was. The exhibition is not for the sake of photographs, but for me to see her world. Therapy, if necessary. And the main thing is honesty. To speak when it hurts, and to speak when it feels good. I looked at her paintings, sharp brushstrokes, deep shadows, but there was light inside. You've changed, I said. I've become stronger. She smiled, just like you. That night, I realized, we both learned not to run uphill, but to walk along the serpentine, slower, but to the top. Then there were the simple things that heal better than speech. The sound of rain on glass. The tea she brewed was too strong, and we diluted it with water. Commas instead of exclamation marks. I helped her hang the new canvases, and she helped me take off my wet coat and hang it in the place where it really belongs. We laughed softly, for the first time without bitterness. I promised myself that I would be there in her silence and in her loud colors. I will accept not only inspiration, but also fatigue. I will not make an altar out of love and will not turn the past into an anchor. I will take our yes to where it is heard in everyday life, to the supermarket, in a taxi, at the end of a hard day. I will learn to say no to everything that is trying to destroy us again. The habit of disappearing, pry, silence out of fear. I'm not perfect. I know that there will be breakdowns, misunderstood words, old reflexes. But now I have a rule. Stop yourself on turns. Breathe, talk. To leave a place for the sky between our phrases is for the light to come. Sometimes, When I look at her, I still think about what I've done to deserve. But at the same moment, I remember, love is not a bonus, but work and a gift at the same time. I don't have to be perfect. I have to be real, her real one. I want to grow old with her, not with a beautiful postcard, but with a living life, with rumpled sheets, unfinished letters, quarrels until noon and reconciliations until night. I want to hold her hand when I'm scared, and let her go when I need space, staying close to my heart. I want to be a support for her, not a stage. And I ask fate for one luxury: time. Time to live it all. Since that evening, we have had rituals. We write short notes to each other, not vows, but reminders. By water. Don't run downhill. Leave room for the sky. I hung a picture of her smile on the wall, not as a shrine, but as a landmark. And inside there is a quiet gratitude for the fact that we did not give up trying. To be honest, I'm still scared. But now it's the fear of a responsible person, not a fugitive. I'm afraid of losing it, so I'm learning to keep it safe. I'm afraid to make a mistake, so I choose a conversation in advance instead of assumptions. I am afraid that the miracle will end, and therefore I am engaged in his support every day, like a fire in the fireplace. Emily laughs again, not like before, but in a different way. The grown-up, warm laugh of a man who has walked through a storm and found a home. I hear that laugh and I understand. We're alive. We are here. And that's enough to keep going. I love her. Without reservations. And I'm ready to prove it, not with words, but with deeds. Here in rainy Washington, among the copper leaves and the smell of paint, our after has already begun. And this time we're writing it together. The next day, the rain didn't give up. It was the Washington kind. The kind that seemed shallow but soaked to the bone. I got off the subway at Foggy Bottom with a paper cup of coffee and dialed Emily. I'm right here. Carry yourself, she said. The rest will be fine. The studio smelled of dirt and wet paper. She put a stool in front of me, as she once did. Sit and don't move. I'll adjust the light. I sat down, and without agreeing, we continued where we left off yesterday, without big speeches, with small steps. Let's make a deal, Emily said, taking out her craft cards. 3 rules. I'm listening. First, don't disappear. Even if it's scary. We write I'm scared instead of disappearing. I agree. Secondly, we call the storm by its name. Not everything is bad, but I'm afraid of your work, my exhibition, that letter. Okay. Third, pause for defense. 1 minute of silence before making excuses. I smiled. You've turned us into a little constitution. We live in a city where they can't survive otherwise, she replied and smiled back. We talked for hours. She's talking about a residence in the desert where red sand is everywhere, even in her teeth, and how it became clear there, in silence, that she spent half her life writing to prove and she wants to talk. I'm talking about my job, how easily numbers turn into a shield, and forecasts into an excuse not to feel. About how I once chose a report instead of her opening day and pretended that it was more important for both of us. I thought then that if I competed with your tables, I would lose, she said. It's easier to leave early than to lose every day. And I thought that if I start feeling, I will destroy everything that I built. It turned out that he ruined it by not starting it. We laughed uncertainly, out of the zone where it's funny and painful in one place. By evening, we had not only rules, but also everyday things. A calendar without heroism. 2 evenings are mine. One is hers, one is Cher, and one is nobody's. A list of anchors in case of panic. Steps. Tea. Window. 3 breaths. I wrote it down on my phone, and then rewrote it by hand so that I could memorize it with my fingers. A week later, she invited me to see the new episode, Georgetown. Saturday, starting at 9, if you can stand the glue and my doubts. I held out. We carried stretchers, argued about the height. She swore at the level he's lying. I silently held the frame while she whispered something in the painting's ear, like a child. Scared? I asked when the first wall came to life. Yes, she said honestly. That's good. I used to be afraid of fear. Now it's like an alarm. It means I'm doing something alive. I wanted to kiss her right there, between the screwdriver and the can of water for brushes, but I just touched her shoulder so as not to disrupt the rhythm. On the same day, I received a letter that made my throat tighten as usual. An offer to move to the headquarters of a senator. Loudly. Boldly. This is a chance. Money. A title, sleepless nights, and most likely moving to New York by spring. I didn't show the email right away. At first, because I was afraid of scaring off our fragile respite. Then, because I was afraid that she would say go. In the end, I was just afraid. Secrets smelled the same. In the evening, Emily, clearing the table, saw my laptop screen. The pause lasted for the same minute, but this time it didn't end with a hug. Were you going to tell me? What is it? She asked evenly. I wanted to figure it out for myself. You promised not to disappear. Hiding is almost the same thing. I inhaled as I had learned. Slowly, counting to 4. I'm scared, I said. It's scary that I'll choose tables instead of you again. And it's scary that if I don't choose, I'll lose myself as a professional. And I'm afraid that they'll put me, in brackets, as a variable again. She sat down on the windowsill. Let's be honest, do you want this job? With my head. Yes. Not with the body. In my heart. For the first time, I don't know. We fell silent. The street was filled with wet leaves and the sound of buses. I sat down next to him. Let's do what we promised. Let's call the storm. It's not about New York. It's about us and the either-or choice that we're tired of. Maybe there's an I. For example, I'll try to create a hybrid, part of the time at headquarters, part of the time remotely. If they say or, we will decide together, and not each in his own head. She nodded. And one more thing. If you leave, it won't mean that you didn't choose me. This will mean that we are looking for a way. But the solution is together. Don't have breakfast alone with your fears. We made a deal. I sent a reply, described the boundaries, and, regardless of the outcome, we go to couples therapy. Not because it's bad, Emily said, but because the door wants to be adjusted by a locksmith while it's still closing and opening. The therapist turned out to be a woman in a knitted sweater who nodded at the heaviest words as if we were talking about the weather. Not belittling, but normalizing. We brought her our cards, and she suggested adding another one. Request. Not you've never, but it would help me if. It's funny how one expression saves 3 quarrels. It would help me if you write when you go to work. In one sentence, Emily said, it would help if you could tell me when you want to be alone instead of disappearing into the workshop for 6 hours. I reply. It sounds simple. Doing it is more difficult. But, as promised, we walked in a serpentine pattern. The response from headquarters came 2 days later. Hybrid is not possible. We need a man on the spot. I read the letter and felt the old reflex come alive in me. Come on. Prove it. Take it, then explain. I put my phone on the table, called Emily, and walked to her place in the rain to say something important without a screen. This is a good chance, she said, when I showed her the letter. Yes, and a bad time. And a bad price. Are you sorry? I choose I. You and a job where I am heard as a person, not as a battery. If it means losing loudly, I'll get over it. She silently pressed her forehead against my shoulder. Then let's celebrate it as a choice, not as a sacrifice, she said. And we'll buy a normal kettle. He whistles like a siren. We bought a kettle. Stupidity, maybe, but sometimes the future starts with the fact that it stops whistling in the kitchen. The opening day came up unnoticed and suddenly, it was like a train that you were preparing for and still shuddered. The gallery was filled with umbrellas, wet coats, and quiet conversation. Emily walked around the room with that same expression, fragile determination. I was her people in case of panic. Water, napkins, short phrases. One critic asked the question as if he was scanning a product. I only intervened once. You are asking why there is so much emptiness on the canvases. Because in a city where there is too much sound, emptiness is a position. And he stepped back, letting her speak further. The panic finally came. At the 15th minute, I saw her fingers twitch, and we habitually played out our anchor. Window. Tea. 3 breaths. She returned to the hall and finished her sentence as if nothing had happened. Not like before. Better, because now she knew she could fall and get up. After closing, we held paper cups with 2 sweet cider in our hands and laughed from exhaustion. An elderly woman came up to us and was silent for a long time, looking at one painting, the one with a lot of light and a thin shadow. I do not know what it is called, she said, but it became quieter inside me. Thank you. Emily nodded, and I saw her straighten out, as if she'd taken an invisible bag off her shoulder. We walked home through the sodden Georgetown, holding hands in our pockets like teenagers. I stopped her at the canal. Remember our rule. Leave room for the sky. Let's leave it. Come on, she said, and lifted her face into the rain. Everyday life tightened up. as minor characters do towards the middle of a film. In the evenings, we wrote each other requests on stickers and put them on the refrigerator. It would help me to leave early tomorrow. It would help me if you said you were proud of me even if it was obvious. Is it funny? Yes. Is it working? Also, yes. My job has also become different. It was the first time I said no to a project that asked me to go around the corners. The boss said, "You've become uncomfortable." I reply, "I've become honest." He snorted. I went home, and for the first time, I felt neither guilt nor emptiness. There was hot water at home, Emily's new music, and the smell of cinnamon. She had learned to bake buns almost like she did when she was a kid, and we were both old enough not to argue about how right. Sometimes we quarreled not without that. One day I was late and didn't write. It's closed. I was offended by her silence. Then they remembered the pause rule. They sat on the carpet like children and took turns saying, "It would help me." After about 20 minutes, it became funny. Both are smart, but we learned the simple thing, to notice and say. We started going to Rock Creek on Sundays. The leaves lie there like a whisper. We didn't talk about great things. They were just walking. Sometimes she would take a small sketchbook and draw the bark of a tree so carefully that I wanted to read it as text. Sometimes I'd draw printouts of my analysts to show how I think not in numbers, but in words. She was saying, "That's where you high, and you hit it." In November, I returned to the cafe by DuPont Circle alone. I ordered 2 cappuccinos out of habit, one with cinnamon, as Emily likes it. He looked at the second cup and smiled. Before it was a ritual of pain, now it's a habit of caring. I texted her, "Yours is on the table, waiting, just like me." She replied with a photo of her fingers in pain and a heart, awkward, like a teenager's. And this was also a treatment. That evening, I printed out our Constitution, for rules and a request. I hung it on the inside of the locker where tea and subway cards are kept. To see it every day, like a toothbrush. Love, it turns out, lives in the same place, in rituals, in coats hung up on time, in an umbrella bought on time, in the message "I'll be 10 minutes late, but I'm coming." I don't know how our story will end in a year, 5, 10. All I know is that right now we choose each other not with words, but by how we set the alarm clock, how we answer emails, and how we trust the rain to wash the city and our heads. Washington is still dripping on the windowsill, the leaves are still lying in copper piles, and the wipers are still pulling them to the curb. Emily and I are learning to be not a campaign, not a flash, not a tragedy, but a life. And when I'm scared, I look at her hands in the paint and remember, don't run downhill, go in a serpentine. When she's scared, she looks at my lists on the fridge and smiles. You've become uncomfortable, and I'm proud of you. We're going slow, but let's go. And this is enough that, passing by our old coffee shop, I was not looking for her ghost in the crowd, but for her real silhouette at the door. Alive, tired, beloved. And so that when we meet eyes, we both feel that a house is not an address. The house is us when we pause, call the storm by name and leave a place for the sky between phrases. December crept up not by calendar, but by sound. The city became quieter, the rain thinned, and the tire nose on Massachusetts Avenue rustled like paper. I began to recognize Washington by the smells, the wet stone at the memorial, the coffee in the walkway at Farragut's, the tart, cold Krakow scent of her workshop. Emily and I lived between these coordinates and our rules, a small constitution that I now opened like a first aid kit. One evening we went up to the Kennedy Center terrace. The Potomac slid lazily below, and a fat moon hung over Virginia. Emily put her hand in my pocket, the way she did when she was freezing and didn't want to admit it out loud. "I've been offered a residence," she said, looking somewhere in Rosalind's direction. 2 months in the spring. Lisbon. I felt an old wave rise up inside me, the one that I used to either run away from or burn everything to ashes. Now I've managed to put a name on it. Fear of distance. 2 months is an eon, I said, before the wave could cover me. We know how to breathe from a distance. We know how not to disappear. She looked at me, searching and really calm. I was afraid you'd say no. I'm afraid of something else, that we will start making decisions separately again. Let's do it together. If you go, we'll make a schedule. If you don't go, it will also be together. We went downstairs, bought silly stick toffees downstairs, and ridiculously crumbled each other's coats with sugar dust. Agree. She submits the documents. If they take it, we'll figure it out. The next morning, There was a letter marked confidential in my mail. The headquarters declined offered Project Synergy, not New York, but a series of analytical materials with a strict deadline, and thus the subtext corners can be rounded. I got into the tryst on Columbus Road, wrote a draft of the answer, and erased it. I postponed it. I called the therapist and made an appointment for an unscheduled session. As we agreed, big decisions are not on the run. During the session, for the first time, I uttered a simple phrase aloud. It would help me if my work didn't feel like a betrayal of someone, me, her, the facts. The therapist nodded in her knitted sweater. Then check it with facts. Ask where their red line is, and tell me your own. In the evening, Emily and I sat down at the table. I printed out the letter and my reply with notes. She took out felt tip pens. Let's put it this way. Green. What is okay for us? Read. What is not? Yellow. On condition. We laughed at our own seriousness, but by the end of the hour we had a map. I sent an email with a specific yes if and no. The next day, I received a short reply, we understand. Then, alas, we will not get together. I read twice, as one reads a diagnosis and an amnesty at the same time. My stomach was empty, but clear. It snowed on Christmas Day, the Washington snow, like powdered sugar that disappears right before your eyes. We met him in Rock Creek, where the bridges creak and the raccoons look at you like you're a neighbor. Emily took a picture of my nose and said, it was officially winter. In the evening, we decorated her studio. Instead of a garland, there was a string with clothespins, on which hung sketches and our requests. I wrote, it would help if you could tell me when you're proud of yourself. She laughed, shook her head, and added softly, I'm proud. In January, I received a review of her exhibition. Overall, it's a good one, but one phrase stuck in the middle like a bone. On the verge of derivatives. I saw how she held herself while she was reading, and how the familiar storm was rising. I'm a fake. We took out the cards. Let's call it a storm, I said. I'm afraid I'm not real. A request? She thought about it. Tell me where you see the real me. Specifically, I took her to her first work, the one where the white space breathes, and the brushstroke goes along the edge, but does not fall through. This is where you leave a void, not out of fear, but out of respect for the audience. And there's a tone over there that the camera can't see, but the person can hear. Her shoulders dropped a couple of millimeters, just enough for me to know that the point had been found. In the evening, she honestly said, it would help if you didn't get into an argument with every critic for me. We have added a new paragraph to the Constitution. Do not fight the shadow. We were solely moving towards living together, not moving foreign. First, I have a spare toothbrush. Then she has a set of keys. Then there's my sweater, which lives better on your chair. We chose a kettle, not a whistling kettle, then a lamp that can adjust the warm and cold temperatures, because paintings need one light, people need another. Sometimes I woke up at night from old worries that all this was a set, that in the morning she would disappear and leave a note. Then I would quietly go to the kitchen, pour water, breathe, as we were taught, and write to her briefly. I woke up, alarmed, everything is okay. In the morning, she would find this message and leave a sticker on the table. I saw it. Nearby, in February, when the city turned back into a gray watercolor, a reply came from Lisbon. We are glad to receive you. We celebrated with faux soup at the Hole on U Street, and they began to plan a schedule. On Saturdays, calls without video. Listen to the voice, not the picture. On Wednesdays there are letters without cases, not reports, not lists, but what we see from our window. I bought paper postcards that were outdated for a long time, and I found pleasure in stamps. Before she left, we went to Rothko's at Phillips. We stood in front of his silence and were silent. Then she said, blue and burgundy are like our pauses and storm. Both are paintings, I reply. While she was in Lisbon, I got to know the city all over again. I walked home along our street to hear dogs sucking in the winter air, and someone's windows playing jazz. On Thursdays, he attended the evening public lectures at Georgetown, the ones he had postponed until better times. He wrote 2 columns, not for the headquarters, but for a small independent publication. I signed it with my last name, not my position. I sent Emily a clipping in a paper letter. She sent me a photo. The clipping is hanging over her sink in her Lisbon apartment, with my crossed-out to-do list next to it. I love that you've become uncomfortable. A postscript at the bottom. We kept our rhythm. There were breakdowns. Once I failed our Wednesday call. The meeting was delayed. The phone died. I did not finish the inform in advance, put to squeeze on it. She didn't yell, but at our Sunday conference call, she said, request. If something breaks down, give me not the form, but the meaning. Not a meeting, but I'm afraid to let people down, so I'll be late. Then I'll be with you, not with your calendar. I wrote it down as a formula. In the spring, she returned, thin, tanned, with eyes in which Lisbon did not disappear, but lived there like a reflex. We met at the DuPont car sharing, and for the first time I thought of nothing but movement. Step, step, hop. The house was no longer an address, it was how we unpacked the suitcase together, threw the sheets into the laundry together and argued on which shelf to put olive oil on hers. She had a new series, lighter than before. On one canvas there is a white staircase going nowhere, and a small wrong jug on the steps. This is us, she said, serpentine staircase. The jug is with water. I laughed. Then let's have a big jug. We came up with a common project, not an exhibition or a report, but something between. And she takes my old notes and analytical tables and turns them into erased texts, leaving only the words through which the person can be heard. I am writing short essays on her paintings, not about the meaning, but about how they work as solutions. We made a mock-up of a newspaper spread. On the left, her silence. On the right, my words. They gave it to friends from a small gallery on X Street. They said, "Let's take it in the summer." We exchanged glances. Summer is coming. Scared? I asked, already as a ritual. Yes, she said, and smiled. But now I like that sound. Sometimes it would come anyway. On one of those days, I snapped at the little things, an improperly closed jar of primer, a shirt thrown on a chair on my, and an answered call from my father. We sat down on the carpet and were silent for a long, honest minute. I said, "It would help if you could remind me why we're doing this." "To live, not to prove," she replied. "And so that the emptiness on our canvases remains intentional, and not from fatigue." In the evening it began to snow. Spring. Wet. Ridiculous. We went out into the yard in our coats over our pajamas and caught flakes with our tongues like children. The neighbor from the third floor rolled her eyes, then smiled and took a picture of us on her ancient iPhone. The photo turned out to be blurry, but it shows the main thing. To people who finally chose not drama, but life. In the summer, I was hung in the gallery. People quieted down by the erased pages and leaned on the windowsills. I heard stares. One guy in a suit asked me, "And where is the politics here?" "That we're leaving room for the sky," I reply. "And that we don't sacrifice words for the sake of victory." Our Constitution hung on the wall, framed and small, like a poster for a chamber play. No pathos, no slogans, 4 points, one word request and an empty line at the bottom for those who want to add their own. By evening, the empty line was filled with the neat handwriting of strangers. "Don't disappear, drink water, talk when it feels good." We walked home and laughed. We didn't come up with anything great. We just left a piece of paper, and people wrote on it what they had wanted to say to themselves for a long time. That night I woke up to the rain. Summer, warm, generous. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at Emily sleeping, disheveled, real, mine. And I realized there will still be fears. Storms, too, but we have a language that we know how to call them, a pause in which we know how to breathe, and a jug of water that we won't forget to buy. I lay back down and whispered into her hair, "Let's leave a place for the sky." She nodded without waking up. And that was our longest yes.